As you may already know, over the last few years we've been ranking every MCU film. In this video we'll be breaking that down into a short, concise explanation of where everything landed as we lead into the rest of Phase 5 going forward. This list was created by committee on a series of podcasts. We appreciate some of the placements are wild.
Christ, if we were ranking films that fell off the hardest, this would be in first place, but that's not what we're doing, so in last place this shall remain.
Good grief, Thor. The f*** are you doing to me? How is it possible to be this bored whilst ogling Chris Hemsworth?
Well then.
Putting us in an eternal sleep, am I right? Eh?
Oh, f*** me, this was boring. Every action scene was in a singular montage, the CGI looked weird as shit, and most of the characters are completely pointless. Bonus points for the moment Chris Evans emerges from the beginning machine. It also biggened me.
This also isn't great. Iron Man 2 is a lesson in how not to follow up a good movie. A lesson that Hollywood is yet to learn, and a lesson that Marvel have lobotomized out of their minds. Sam Rockwell is the only reason I haven't reported this film for assault.
Jack and I were a little split on this one, so we decided to compromise and go with Jack's opinion. To be fair, a lot of the comedy doesn't land, and they make one of the biggest storytelling mistakes by splitting up the team they spent the first movie building. Ego was an interesting villain concept, and don't get me started on the Yondu situation. However, overall a lesser movie in the grand scheme of things.
Frankly, it's a miracle that we have the MCU considering how it started. Starting off with a bang and then whimpering on for 4 years. I guess superhero movies were just particularly shite back then. Tom Hiddleston shined through with his portrayal of Loki, and some of Chris Hemsworth's fish out of water jokes are still excellent 13 years later, but overall this film was pretty dull.
Look, this movie was very important, however, that does not mean the movie was good, and it is time people learned the difference.
This is the embodiment of fine. Fine in the dictionary these days includes a copy of this movie on DVD. DVD.
I mean, I'm not going to complain too much about looking at Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh for 2 hours, but that is about all this film had going for it. There were some good character moments for sure, and some good action sequences, however overall this film felt fairly lackluster.
This film is a CGI mess. It has no Luis, and it builds up to nothing as it turns out that Jonathan Majors is a Still, Paul Rudd is great. No idea how it ranked this high, but we did say it would get wild.
This film is surprisingly charming. Ms. Marvel is endearing and funny, almost acting as an audience member stumbling into the MCU, but there are a couple of things holding it back from being higher on the list. This movie has what must be the worst villain we've seen since The Incredible Hulk, and the musical scene being utterly baffling, especially considering the speaking in rhyme language from the original comics would both make more sense and be more interesting. The comedy from Ms. Marvel and the billion flirkins save it from tumbling further down this list, however.
This was alright. Loses a lot of value on the rewatch. Great visuals though.
Paul Rudd in the MCU? Yes please. Bit gutted Edgar Wright left, would have liked to have seen how that would have turned out. Luis is glorious, we need more Luis. Overall this movie was fine. Paul Rudd and Michael Pena together is always going to be worth a watch.
Take me down to the cameo city where I roll my eyes and the films are shitty. This film should have been called Multiverse of Meh. Okay, maybe we're being a bit harsh, but for all this film's strengths, it was built up to be so much more in regards to the wider multiverse plot. That said, Scarlet Witch's villain arc comes full circle in the best way, and the signature Raimi horror flair shines through. In no way a bad movie, but not what it could and should have been.
We remember nothing about this movie, something about a fish man. I assume the reason it placed as high as it did on the list is purely because of M'Baku.
This fish man would be bound before us as we speak. You bald-headed demon.
What can you say about Iron Man? Of course, this is where the saga begins, with many frankly outstanding films to follow. However, Downey Jr.'s introduction to the character still remains funny, charming, and in places imposing. RDJ was also surrounded by an impressive supporting cast. Jeff Bridges was conniving as the villain, Gwyneth Paltrow was a good balance as the assistant turned love interest, Clark Gregg became a mass-loved character, and Terrence Howard was there. To this day, Iron Man's jokes are still funny, action is still entertaining, and contains some of the best-looking suit-up scenes in all of the MCU. We are placing Iron Man at number 16. This either speaks to how many amazing MCU movies have come out since, or the fact that we are clinically insane.
Miniman returns, and this time with a winged girlfriend. Paul Rudd is still excellent and Luis is still excellent. And of course, shouting Baba Yaga in an Eastern European accent has now become a staple of my life.
Baba Yaga! Holy fucking shit! Where the did that come from? This movie had no right to be any good, and nobody thought it would be. Two of your leads are a tree and a raccoon? Yes, and they are glorious. Two of the best characters in all of the MCU, quite frankly. This is Chris Pratt before a decade of playing the same character, so it was fresh. We discovered Dave Bautista is a badass and f***ing hilarious. Didn't make our top 10, but even so, banger.
We see a huge leap in character growth throughout this movie, pushing emphasis on the fact that Iron Man is not just a suit, which becomes more and more important as the MCU goes on. Iron Man 3 is also the first time we get some proper utilisation out of the Rhodey character, even if they did do some weird f***ing about with the War Machine aspect. Once again, Tony Stark's signature comedy lands most of the time, and that plane scene is just cool. Depending on who you are, you either loved or hated Trevor Slattery. Granted, he was much cooler pre-twist when we thought he was the Mandarin, but plot twist, he's pretty funny and we enjoyed it.
This is basically a Jackie Chan movie with a Marvel budget. I'm just going to remind you of the bus scene and leave it at that.
I think we can all agree that Tom Holland is excellent. This movie captures the perfect balance of high school charm with superhero action and has what we believe is the best twist in the MCU. This movie didn't quite make the top 10, but only by a smidge.
It's all the big sad, but at least we've got Tom Holland and Zendaya having a little flirt. Another great twist in this movie and a great villain to go with it. At this point we weren't really aware of the bigger MCU ramifications this would have, so it's hard to compliment the film for that, but certainly worth noting.
Now we are f***ing talking. This is the shit. The last hour of this movie is one of the best things to ever happen in cinema, and f*** yourself if you disagree, because you're clearly an idiot. The character interactions are top tier, almost every joke lands, the use of each of the characters in the action set pieces is some of the coolest shit ever, and contains possibly the greatest line of dialogue in all of the MCU.
I recognize the council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it.
We would also be criminals if we didn't mention that this film introduced the Avengers theme score to the world. If you ever need to get hyped up, whack on that 10 out of 10 piece of music and you jam out wherever you are. F me, it's good. At least Phase 1 got something in the top 10, am I right?
This is just more Avengers without needing to sit through them all getting to know each other. Boo-hoo, they don't like each other, even though we all know they're going to like each other. We open with a fucking banger of an action sequence with one-shots, team-up moves, and them all lining up to jump over a small gap in tandem for some reason. Who cares? It was cool. James Spader came out of nowhere to give us arguably the second best villain in all of the MCU with Ultron. Intimidating, unhinged, yet funny. We will be taking cover now as we place this above the first Avengers film and the internet won't like it. But f*** you, we're right.
Holy fucking shit, where the f*** did that come from? Given the first two Thor films are piss poor, by all accounts this movie shouldn't exist. Top tier comedy from start to finish, outstanding action and visuals, great soundtrack, and they finally work out how to utilise Loki correctly. I can't wait to see what they do with Thor 4.
Nostalgia overload here. The hype around this movie led us to believe this film was only going to be disappointing, but we're happy to admit that we got this one wrong. Despite a couple of pause for applause moments, this film brings everything and everyone into the fold for a dark, action-packed Spider-Man romp that I can happily watch over and over. You know, I'm something of a Spider-Man fan myself.
Holy fucking shit, where the f did that come from? Everything about this movie slaps. The conspiracy thriller story, the hand-to-hand action, the Winter Soldier and his reveal to be Bucky, which most of us nerds knew going in, but still was cool as shit. Sod the MCU, this is one of the best movies, full stop.
If this movie was just the final battle, this would be the best thing we have ever watched. Holy shit, it's so good. The best music, the best team-ups, every character you could possibly think of, except Coulson. I would have died. But no, unfortunately this movie is just a bit too long, and while the whole time heist section is equally cool as f*** and every performance top tier, seeing the remaining characters at their lowest, the rest was filled with a bunch of fat, depressed gamer playing Fortnite jokes, and that just fell quite flat. I mean, who do you think your main audience is? That being said, this is still number 4 of 33.
Good God, you didn't need to go so hard, sirs. Whose side did you pick? If your answer was Cap, then you're a moron. Every move he made was entirely in his self-interest. Argue all you want, you are wrong. Anyway, the conflict between Iron Man and Cap throughout the film was incredible to watch. Even when they teamed up, you never knew when it was going to flip back on its head. And of course it did, because Cap is a selfish twat. Civil War also introduced a bunch of great characters. On the hero side, this is the first we see of Black Panther, with arguably his coolest suit. His apparel was downhill from here. We also get Spider-Man. This was huge for multiple reasons, namely that Sony owned the rights and this was an unheard of team-up and a big deal. On the villain side, we get Zemo. While he was incredibly intimidating and clearly a highly intelligent character, he's nothing mind-blowing. But he does become amazing later down the line. Anyway, this shit slapped.
James Gunn bounced back quite dramatically from the fall-off that was Volume 2. Every single one of these characters was at the best we've ever seen them. The heart-wrenching backstory they gave us for Rocket will stay with you forever. Some of the best gags in the entire MCU and a perfect send-off for the Guardians as we know them. Nathan Fillion is a planetary treasure, so an extended role for him in anything gains it several points. Overall, bittersweet, because as I mentioned, it was the perfect send-off, but not seeing Drax again is pretty upsetting.
What can we say? This movie has it all. It brings together everything we've been building towards, with the chance to see these characters not only at their best, but at their most desperate. Thanos cements himself as the franchise's best and most focused villain. Outstanding action sequences, high stakes, great character interactions, and another impeccable use of the Avengers theme music. Avengers Infinity War easily secures the top spot for us, with little needed to be said as for why.
Let us know in the comments if you disagree with our placements. Same as usual, your opinion means nothing to us, but share them anyway. Engagement and shit.
Make sure to subscribe to the channel to see where we add any upcoming films to the list, and of course, any other videos we do in the future. Thank you for watching, and until next time, we shall see you then.